When the first cannon struck the Theodosian walls, we knew our city's end had come. For weeks we had stood atop the ramparts of Constantinople, watching the Ottoman camps spread like a sea of fire around us. Smoke hung in the air day and night, and their drums beat without pause, echoing through every broken street. We were few, priests, merchants, and weary soldiers clinging to duty more than hope. Yet the emperor, Constantine Palaiologos, told us that the Mother of God would not abandon her city. Still, with each dawn, the ground shook again, and the stones of our ancestors crumbled. I was a soldier of the Imperial Guard, born near the quarter of Blachany. My armor was old, my hands scarred from years of war. But nothing prepared me for the thunder of those monstrous guns. The air itself seemed to split when they fired, shaking the very earth beneath our feet. I saw towers that had stood for 1,000 years collapse in an instant. At night under torchlight we rebuilt the breaches, praying as we worked. The emperor walked among us, his face pale but calm, his words steady even as despair took root in every heart. Food was gone by then. We boiled leather from old harnesses and stripped bark from trees. The smell of death hung over the city like a cloud, yet still the bells of Hagia Sophia rang each morning, and we prayed before the icons, begging the saints to hold the walls firm. Some whispered that aid would come from Venice or Rome, but the sea was closed. Ottoman galleys choked the Bosporus, their oars rising and falling in black rhythm. We had no hope, but we fought because there was nothing else left to do. At night I heard mothers singing to quiet their starving children. Then came the 29th of May. Before dawn, the horns sounded, deep and terrible. From every side the enemy advanced beneath their banners. The guns roared once more, and the ladders struck the walls. I fought at the gate of St. Romanus. The sky was red with fire, and arrows fell like rain. Men shouted prayers as they died. I saw the emperor ride past, his sword flashing in the smoke, crying out for his men to hold. That voice still haunts me, the last emperor of Rome shouting into the chaos of our ruin. When the walls finally gave way, the enemy poured in like a flood. The Janissaries came first, silent and relentless. We fell back through the streets, stumbling over the dead. My spear was broken, my shield gone. I remember the cries of women in the distance, the sound of doors being smashed, the smell of smoke and blood. A monk beside me tried to lift a cross and was cut down where he stood. I struck one man before another. Blow came from behind, and everything went dark. When I woke, the city was lost. Smoke covered the sky, and the banners of the crescent flew where our eagles once stood. I was bound with rope, driven through streets I had known since boyhood. The churches were plundered, their gold torn from the altars. In Hagia Sophia, captives were herded like animals beneath the shattered dome. The icons lay broken, trampled underfoot. A woman clutched her child beside me until both were dragged away. I called to them, but no one heard. The noise of the conqueror's victory drowned every human voice. We were brought to the hippodrome, where lines of prisoners knelt under the eyes of Ottoman guards. They divided us, men to one side, women to the other. The strong were marked for labor, the rest cast aside. A soldier struck me and asked if I could write. When I said yes, he laughed and tied a cloth around my arm. I did not yet know that this mercy meant servitude. That night under the moon, I saw the city burn. The flames rose over domes and towers, painting the water red. I whispered a prayer to the saints, not for rescue, but remembrance, for the world beyond our walls would never know what died here. They led us through the hippodrome at dawn, the place where once chariots had thundered and crowds had cheered. Now it lay filled with ragged men. Chains bit into my wrists and the rope around my waist chafed until my skin was raw. The air reeked of sweat and ash and the metallic tang of fear. Ottoman clerks moved among us like crows, marking and tallying those who might fetch a price. Young boys tried to hold their heads high and were struck for their pride. Women huddled together, staring at the ground as if by not looking they might make the horror pass. We were paraded before buyers who spoke in tongues that rolled like surf, their eyes sharp with calculation. Fingers prodded shoulders, hands lifted chins, and teeth were checked as if to assess a man's stamina. I watched a judge silence because his hands were ink-stained, a captain chosen for the galleys because his arms were broad and hard. The men bargaining kept gentle manners, but their trade was a cold cruelty. When they paused before me, I felt the weight of being unmade, reduced to measure, muscle, and the value of a life on a palm. A merchant purchased me, a quiet man who owned a household near the Golden Horn. He signed his name on a small scrap of parchment, tore a coin from a purse, and paid as though settling an account. The cords were cut from my wrists, and those who had taken from me the last tokens of home, a cracked ring, a tiny icon on my belt, stepped away with them. I handed them without protest. There is no use in clinging to things in a house that will not honour memory. The merchant gave me a rough shirt and set me to carry water and stoke low fires, tasks that left my hands raw and aching. The household's order felt like a cage disguised as law. The mistress doled food with exact care, but watched every portion as if justice might be found in crumbs. Slaves moved with bowed eyes and spoke only when spoken to. Any noise outside that correct silence was punished. My days took shape in a small, brutal rhythm: rise before dawn, clean, serve, mend, and wait upon guests until the lamps were lit. Nights were the worst when the city's clamour fell away, and the absence of my name sounded like a bell tolling endlessly in my chest. Rumours came like stray birds, of men condemned to the road hell of the galleys, of noble sons led to distant courts, of families parted by contract and barter. Occasionally a sailor would return with news of mercy found among Venetian traders, or of captives ransomed by friends with coin. I dreamed of such mercy, a coin slipped into a hand, a note sewn into a hem, a friend who would burn through the law of possession. In sleep the sea opened before me like a road, and each morning I woke with that road still empty and my hands still bound to labour. Still small kindnesses arrived illicit and precious. A kitchen boy once slipped me a crust, smiling as if to say we were men beneath our marks. The merchant's daughter watched me with a bold curiosity, and one night wrapped a spare blanket over my shoulders when the wind cut through the shutters. Such acts felt treasonous in their softness, and I hoarded them like bread. They altered nothing of my fate, but they proved that the heart could survive small rebellions even inside a cage. Months stitched themselves into a dull tapestry of labour and quiet watchfulness. I learned enough of their tongue to fetch a basin, to beg for a milder task, to ask for a second cup. I traded favours and mended straps and set aside a copper when I could. In stolen hours I wrote names on scraps and burned them after hiding the ash. Memory became my liturgy, each name a prayer I spoke into the dark. Sometimes I thought the smoke from our hearths carried those names across the water, that a lover or brother might read the ash as a sign and come. It was a hope, but it kept my hands from yielding to despair. Between work and watch I kept my eyes on the harbour through a narrow slit of a window, counting sails and measuring time as if some flag might yet claim me. They marched us from square to square at dawn, the ropes biting into my wrists until the skin shone. Around the hippodrome the air smelled of smoke and raw copper, and the ground held the grit of ash where fires had taken the wood of houses. Men pushed and shouted, women clung to children and wailed. Officers in foreign dress moved like harvesters through the crowd, selecting men by eye. I kept my head low and a name in my mouth like a prayer. To be chosen did not always mean death, but it meant leaving everything known and being counted among other things now. I was sold to a household near the water, a place of low rooms and bright tiles where strangers came to dine on fish and speak in a tongue I had only just begun to follow. My first tasks were small and ignoble: carry water, sweep the floors, fetch wood. The mistress watched like a careful judge, while the children stared with eyes that had already learned too much. Gradually, the rhythm of work replaced the rawness of capture. Labour steadied me where grief had torn. I learned the names of pots and the precise place to lay a platter, so that a guest might not notice the hands that served him. Months of servitude teach a man the geometry of another's life. I learned to read the moods of my master, a nod that meant mercy, a silence that meant watch yourself, and to know when to speak and when to pretend not to hear. I mended ropes that would go upon ships, scrubbed the bottoms of boots once polished by men who would never come home, and carried messages wrapped in wax that smelled of cinnamon. Each small object I touched was a world evaporated. With every chore, my hands remembered other tools and other duties, and that memory felt like a wound made into a scar. Hope hid in rumour. A sailor would return with a tale of ransom paid in Venice, or of merchants who traded freedom for coin. I collected names like seeds, brothers, cousins, friends, writing them on scraps and hiding them beneath tiles. I tried to send pleas stitched into hems, but clothes went missing and purses returned empty. Once, emboldened, I tried to slip away in the dark, climbing over a low wall toward the harbour. A dog barked. Men dragged me back. The captain's lash laid a map of bruises along my back. After that, I learned the arithmetic of escape. Courage minus guard equals broken body. There were small mercies that arrived and warmed like bread. A kitchen boy slipped me a crust wrapped in lettuce, and for a day I felt human again. A neighbour from my own city found me and left a coin beneath my pallet. With that copper, I bribed a sailor to carry a note to a priest who might plead for ransom. The priest came once and read names from a book in a voice that made my sons' names seem like prayers. These gestures did not buy my freedom in full, but they knitted a fragile rope of hope that kept me upright among the ruins. Years took on the dull cadence of labour and watchfulness. Masters died. New ones claimed me with different faces and laws. I learned enough of their speech to ask for a milder task, to beg for an extra slice of bread, to trade the favour of a mended strap for a longer rest. I tended docks and watched sails like a man counting heartbeats, waiting for a flag that might mean home. Some men never saw such a flag. Some were carried off to galleys and never returned. I kept names behind my breast like beads, reciting them each night until sleep softened the edges of hunger and fear. At last a woman came to the gate with coins for ransom, a neighbour with the stubborn grace of those who refuse to forget. She paid, the clerk signed a paper, they cut the cords from my wrists. I walked through streets transformed by ruin and time. My house was smaller, my sons were older, the market had new faces. My wife held me until dawn, and in her arms the years uncoiled as if someone had unknotted a net. I told what had happened in church and in the tavern, not to raise pity, but to ensure the names of those taken would not dissolve into rumour. I kept a small coin hidden for the poor, and taught my sons the names of those who had been kind. Memory, I learned, is a kind of ransom. When strangers asked how we survived, I said by holding names, trading kindness for bread, and refusing to let our stories be sold. That is how a man returns whole and lives, always remembered and survives.